Power and corruption are two sides of a wicked coin. Welcome to the podcast that tells stories of the world's largest, most salacious corruption scandals and explores the myriad ways corruption creeps into the hearts and minds of men and women, the consequences of corruption for perpetrators and victims, and the red flags that, had they been identified and addressed, might have changed the course of history. I'm Diana Shaw, and I'm joined today by my co-host,
Tatiana Sainati,
and our story developer,
Fab Patria.
We are lawyers at the DC-based law firm Wiley Rhine. I'm a partner in our white-collar crimes practice. Tatiana is the head of our International Arbitration and Disputes Group, and Fab is an associate in our Government Contracts Group. Honestly, I don't even know where to start with this story today. Our main character today is one of, I think, the wildest people we've ever covered on the podcast.
That is saying something.
Basically, he is the story, which I think you might love, by the way. he is the central character. He is the story. His name is Ramzan Kadyrov, and he is the current head of the Chechen Republic, also known as Chechnya, not to be confused with the Czech Republic. So that's an important distinction. We'll do a quick geography pop quiz. How much do either of you know about the Chechen Republic?
All I know is it's in Russia.
Is it in Russia? Or is it in the Ukraine? Or is it an independent republic? What stance are we taking on the podcast today?
We are not going to take a stance. That is the stance we are taking. But according to the Internet of Things, it's a republic in Russia. Whether it's independent or not, I don't really think we can reach a conclusion on that. It's situated between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea within Russia. Since the dissolution of the Soviet Union, it enjoyed a relatively brief period of independence, but it's been under the Russian federal control since the Kadyrov clan, first under Ramzan's father and now under Ramzan, took over in the kind of aughts in the 2000s. But Ramzan Kadyrov has been the Chechen president since 2007. And as a figurehead goes, he's really quite a character. So he has inspired this cult of personality, almost absolute cult of personality, sometimes called Ramzanism. So it even has a name. And Ramzanism has been described as, quote, equal parts bling, violence, nationalism, kleptocracy, and religion. Any guess what the predominant religion in the Chechen Republic is?
Ramzanism? Russian Orthodoxy?
Yes. No. Huh. This is somewhat stale data. It's from 2010, but at least at that time, it was estimated that 95% of Chechens practice Sunni Islam.
Really?
Yes.
Would not have guessed.
I thought that was fascinating. Obviously. I would not have guessed either. But let's talk a little bit about the bling part of Ramzanism for the moment, shall we?
I was hoping we would.
I mean, let's always start with the bling. Despite Chechnya being one of Russia's poorest regions, with a very high poverty rate and unemployment rate, Ramzan lives like a celebrity king. He's built himself multiple opulent palaces. He owns a fleet of supercars. He maintains a collection of exotic animals, literally lions, tigers, and bears.
Oh my.
Right? And he's acquired a stable of horses that race all over the world. And ladies, he's no wallflower. He loves to document his life on Instagram. He's super into social media. He had 3 million followers on Insta before he was blocked in 2017, following the imposition of sanctions brought under the Magnitsky Act, which is legislation that aims to punish human rights violators. So he's been kicked off, but he's so committed to living life in the open that he has tried to get back on multiple times by setting up new accounts, but keeps getting kicked off.
Wow.
But he absolutely loves being on social media. And while he was on, he was, shall we say, a prolific poster. He would post images of himself praying, working out, meeting with officials, and hanging out with this group of bros, all of whom weirdly happen to be guys with like big biceps. This seems to be the criteria for being good friends with Ramzan. And then taking a page out of Putin's playbook, and by the way, Ramzan has called Putin his idol, he frequently posts videos of himself shirtless on horseback, which I guess is like a thing. I don't understand exactly why that is, but apparently it's a thing with guys to be shirtless on horseback.
It's extremely masculine, I suppose.
I guess so. At least other guys, that's how it reads. I'm not sure I understand it, but
yeah, I don't know if we need to get too deep into the psychology of that.
Yeah, maybe not.
I feel unqualified to assess.
He's also sparred with Mike Tyson, so he really not only wants to project an image of strength, but like really lives it. He's partied with Gerard Depardieu and other celebrities like Jean-Claude Van Damme and Hilary Swank, both of whom attended his 35th birthday party. As I was doing the research, I was trying to figure out how Hilary Swank ended up in the mix of all of these people. I'm speculating that it's maybe because of her role in the movie $1 Million Baby, where she played a female boxer, potentially. But I actually don't know. I'm completely speculating.
Maybe he just has a crush.
Could be. I don't know. But in the end, she ended up firing her manager and her entire management team after appearing at the birthday party, when she later realized that he was alleged to be involved in all sorts of human rights abuses, which she claims she had no idea of at the time. So that didn't go well for Hillary. But speaking of human rights abuses, maybe we should shift to that side of the whole persona. So Ramzan is not all biceps and bling. He was once described as, quote, vulgar, venal, and vicious, somewhere between Uday Hussein and the notorious B.I.G. Do we know who Uday Hussein is? Because I didn't.
I do not.
Okay, so let's just take a little side journey. Uday Hussein was Saddam Hussein's son.
Okay.
He was the chairman of the Iraqi Olympic Committee and the Iraq Football Association, and he was known to torture Iraqi athletes who didn't win.
What?
Yeah. He also, in one of the more memorable episodes that he's alleged to have been involved in, bludgeoned one of his father's employees to death at the birthday party for the Egyptian president's wife, and then stabbed the corpse multiple times with an electric carving knife.
God.
Mm-hmm. His body double said the word that best described him was, quote, sadistic. So that's Uday. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that paints a picture.
Back to Ramzan. So there are numerous reports that Ramzan uses a series of secret prisons to detain and torture suspected insurgents and critics. He's also suspected of being responsible for dozens of extrajudicial killings and forced disappearances. He denies this, and it's unclear. I couldn't tell from the research how much of this has ever really been proven, but there are these allegations swirling out there. It won't surprise you to learn that journalists, activists, and even actually some Instagram users who criticize him or his policies have faced things like harassment and threats and potentially worse. I actually found one article from 2020 titled, quote, Revenge Without Borders. That's all about the methods used by the Kadyrov regime to make the social media critics disappear. So even civilians on social media have gotten afoul of the regime as a result of some criticism that they've posted. Now, there's plenty that's pretty unique about Ramzan, but when it comes to the allegations of corruption, you're going to see some very familiar themes and mechanisms here with some of the other corrupt leaders that we've covered on the show. So among the allegations are that he controls a complex patronage network of state-controlled companies and foundations, which he allegedly uses to launder public funds, which some estimates reach about a third of Chechnya's annual budget, get laundered through these state-controlled companies and foundations, and then are funneled through interest-free loans and shell companies to members of Kadyrov's family. He also has relatives highly placed in government who are alleged or believed to direct government contracts to firms controlled by either allies or members of the Kadyrov family. And then they are able to siphon off funds through methods like inflated contracts or fictitious transactions, which makes me think of our friend Fat Leonard, who would give the Navy these overinflated invoices and then peel off the top the additional funds that they got paid. Also, interestingly, he's believed to have embezzled Russian funds intended for Chechnya's reconstruction, which I would have thought would have upset Putin. But speculation is that Putin tolerates Ramzan because it's very useful to have a kind of a loyal soldier in that region who can guarantee hundreds of thousands of votes at election time and also can rally troops when needed. And that seems to be the case with Ukraine. I think it's estimated that about 20,000 Chechens have fought in support of Russia's role in the invasion of Ukraine. So Ramzan's been in charge since 2007, but in recent years, rumors have swirled that his health is suffering and that Putin may be considering who should be the successor. Now, Ramzan has denied having any sort of health issues, and he's posted, his workouts and showing that he's still very robust. But it looks as though he's grooming his eldest son, who is 17 years old, to be the next Chechen head. He recently appointed his son the secretary of the region's Security Council. 17, which I think, and I'm not exactly sure how it works, but I think by placing him on the region's Security Council, it actually gives his son a role in the Russian government. So this just further cements the Kadyrov connection with the Kremlin. So there's a very good chance that the Kadyrov legacy may continue well into the future.
Wonderful.
I know. It's pretty bleak. Yeah. And we've covered bleak.
We have covered bleak, and it is pretty bleak. And this is a detour from the way that we normally think about things in some way. But I've been back involved with one of my favorite podcasts called The History Chicks, which covers amazing stories of historical female figures.
Ooh.
Yes, it's fantastic. But I've been listening to an episode on Maria Theresa. And so what this reminds me is it's just sounds so much like what the world was like, what Europe was like, at least in the 17th and 18th centuries, where you have families in power, and it doesn't really matter what they do or how bad they get. They have a divine right to be in charge, and you have these 16, 17, 18-year-olds running around with total authority over the lives of millions.
It certainly sounds like it has the potential to be dynastic, but of course, all of this is at the pleasure of the Russian president. So, it could end at any moment, depending on
Russian president, the Holy Roman Emperor. I do see a lot of historical antecedents. Speaking of which, we do see some of our very typical red flags whenever we have these kind of kleptocratic rulers, right? Which is nepotism and cronyism all over the place, and a complete suppression of freedom of speech and expression. That's when we saw in Equatorial Guinea. If you can suppress dissidents, there's very little you can't do.
I think that's exactly right. And I think, why don't we just shift to the red flag roundup? I think you've hit on several that I noticed in this story. And I think in this case, it's not really a matter of internal controls breaking down. Unfortunately, those controls didn't exist in the first place. So, I think all we can do maybe today is engage in a somewhat academic exercise and ask, what safeguards might we have put in place to check a leader in a situation like this, given the chance? What could potentially be sort of a balancing counterforce in a situation like this when you have a very charismatic leader with a lot of authority? And I think you've touched on some of the ways that authority can be used to cement power through nepotism and ensuring that you have a stronghold through family ties. But he was allowed to control substantial federal funds without any kind of independent auditing and oversight, right? And so who knows how that funding was used. And so we've often talked about the importance of some kind of independent oversight or auditing mechanism to safeguard against that.
Yeah. It's fascinating, too, that he's so transparent about his lifestyle. This is actually something when I was getting to know Deborah LaPrevotte, who's the former head of the FBI's kleptocracy unit, she frequently would call social media because a lot of these kleptocrats or their families post on social media, and it becomes a very easy way to figure out if individuals are living a lifestyle beyond their official means or capacity, right? So she had stories to tell of parents, the parents telling their kids, stop posting, we're going to get caught. And this seems like quite the opposite of, I am openly and proudly showing off this lifestyle that I have on the backs of the people. And so it does, at least for me, makes me wonder about, and we talked a little bit about this, I think, with Equatorial Guinea as well, but like the role of the public, and that's not just like, suppressing distance on social media, but if you have a populace that does not perceive national resources, national funds as theirs, as something that they have control over, but instead sees this as, well, it's Ramzan's money. Then I think that feeds into this belief that he can do whatever he wants with it.
Well, and I think when there's a lack of transparency, nobody has any basis against which to judge. Like, they may not know how much he is entitled to or not, or what he should be able to live on based on what's due to him or not. And so there's just a lack of knowledge and understanding to begin with, which puts you in a very weak position to press a point. And then on top of that, they don't know what they should be entitled to as a people. And then I think a point that you've made in earlier episodes, I think this was when we talked about Ukraine, when people are primarily focused, especially in areas that are very impoverished, they're just focused on, where is my next meal coming from? The luxury of asking questions about what feel like very academic questions about what should a government give its people, or what is due a people from its government, that just feels like the sort of question that is, I don't know, just too much of a privilege to get to ask when you're focused on much more immediate sort of primal needs. And so I think in some ways creating this kind of wealth disparity, it is an advantage to a leader, because it keeps folks focused on the immediate need and not maybe asking some of those probing questions.
It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And it's really a different, we've seen different approaches to this, right? There's definitely and you could see even someone like Vat Leonard, who obviously wasn't a kleptocrat or a ruler of a particular country, but individuals who take the approach that the way to ensure my grift endures, or that I can keep the scheme going, is to spread the wealth and to make sure that everyone has a piece of the pie, and I can keep the biggest piece, but that's the way to quiet any sort of dissent. And then there's this other approach of, if people are absolutely, and I think of it as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but yeah, if you're focused on where am I going to sleep and how am I going to feed my kids, you're a lot less focused on the antics of your president.
Right. So if I were coming in today and I were going to put some fundamentals in place, first, you get greater transparency if you require financial disclosures from your public officials, right? You have to have rules around nepotism and conflicts of interest. That alone would address a huge part of this. You need some kind of mechanism for separation of powers and some kind of check and balance system, which they didn't have here. And then we've talked about just the importance of free media and civil society as an important check in a balanced system as well. And so I think just those fundamental elements could go a long way in a situation like this. And you see what happens when you don't have any of those things, just how far someone can go in terms of basically running it as though it's a personal bank account.
Yeah.
I'd also add, what's their procurement system like? Is it open? Like, do they compete for awards? Can they protest? How does that work on that side of things?
That's a great question. I think it's not an open competition process. It sounds like it's very easy for them to direct these state contracts to specific companies. So whether they have the veneer of a competition or have even done away with that, I don't know. But it's clear that, at least from the allegations, that most of those contracts are given to either allies or members of the family. And you, with your government contracts background, you live and breathe this. So maybe you can just share a little bit about the way our system works and some of the checks that are in place that help safeguard against that within our own system.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is kind of how you had mentioned transparency, being able to post competitions, allowing people to compete, encouraging people to compete by, showing that if you show up and you have something to offer and it's good, that you will get the award based on merit instead of, you have certain connections. And then on the protest side of things, like allowing people to be able to protest an award that they think might be tainted by various issues. That serves as kind of like an additional accountability mechanism where you have to answer to someone and you have to explain your reasoning for how you use these funds. And then comes, GAO, or the Court of Federal Claims, an outsider that should be impartial, deciding over all of this, and which goes back to your separation of powers point.
Right.
You're not just putting all the power into kind of one bucket of the government.
And I think at a very high level, this gets to the concept that we've talked about and that we embrace in our groups and our practices, which is the good governance ecosystem, that there is no one thing that's necessary to really combat corruption or ensure good governance, whether it's in a company or in a state. It's all of these different pieces that have to be working together. And we've seen in some of our episodes what happens when one or two of those pieces break down. And here's one where none of the pieces seem to be in place. And so to your point, Diana, I think it brings it back to the fundamentals. Like, what are the rudimentary things that we need to put in place in the first instance to try and build something where really it seems like there is no system whatsoever?
Well, I think for our friends in Chechnya, it seems as though a period of transition may be coming in the future, at least with respect to their leadership. Who knows what will happen with respect to their system of government? I do hope that at some point, some of these internal controls will make their way into their system. I think we've seen, and the data supports, that it's to a country's benefit, not just from a good governance standpoint, but also to the bottom line financially. It's to a government's benefit to have these internal controls in place. It drives competition. It obviously ensures that public funds end up going to the intended beneficiaries, right, and not lining the pockets of others. So we can certainly hope that at some point down the road, maybe some of these internal controls make their way into that system of government. But yes, that is the story of where Chechnya is today. Well, I want to thank our listeners for joining us for today's episode and invite you back next month for another scandal, this time told to you by Tatiana. Do we know what the scandal's going to be, or are we still deciding on which one to choose?
We do know what the scandal is going to be.
Okay.
And I will say only this: we are crossing the pond. Next month.
That's exciting. Oh, I can't wait for that. Till then, if you like this podcast, please let us know by liking us on whatever listening platform you use, and maybe even sharing us with friends, family, or anyone you know who, like us, loves a good story about people behaving badly. As always, be good, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.